A retired Navy SEAL found a German Shepherd puppy buried beneath Colorado snow, wrapped in a burgundy handbell sash stitched with a message meant for him alone. He thought he was saving one small life from the cold. Before nightfall, that trembling puppy would lead him back to a chapel, a broken bell, and the call he had spent 2 years trying not to remember. Snow had stopped before dawn over Colorado Springs, but the cold stayed behind, like an old soldier refusing dismissal. Along Gold Camp Road, where the mountains shouldered close and the pine trees held white weight in their branches, Derek Langford guided the county plow with one gloved hand on the wheel and the other near the heater vent. Not because he needed warmth, he told himself, but because old knuckles complained louder in winter. At 44, Derek still carried the shape of the Navy SEAL he had been. 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, built with the hard economy of a man who had spent most of his life asking his body to obey before it had time to argue. His face was square, clean-shaven, and cut by weather more than age, with a sharp jaw, a straight nose that had been broken once and set well enough, and gray-blue eyes that seemed to look past whatever stood in front of him toward the nearest exit. His dark brown hair was clipped close, silver beginning at the temples. He wore an olive field jacket over a gray wool sweater, black canvas work pants, old leather gloves, and winter boots scarred by salt. Nothing on him was decorative. Even his watch looked like it had survived 2 wars and taken offense at the idea of retirement. People in town called him reliable. They liked that word. Reliable meant they could call when a culvert iced over, when a veteran's truck died, when an elderly widow needed a generator started before the pipes froze. It did not ask why he lived alone in a cedar cabin above Manitou Springs, why he volunteered for search and rescue but skipped every Christmas dinner, why the handbell case in his hall closet had not been opened in 2 years. 2 years since Owen Price called during a storm. 2 years since Derek watched his phone light up, saw Owen's name, and let it ring itself into silence, because he was tired in a way sleep could not fix. By morning, Owen was dead. A heart complication, sudden and ugly. The doctors used words that sounded merciful, because nobody had to live inside them afterward. Derek did. The plow blades scraped over packed snow with a steady iron growl. Dawn made the mountains look innocent, all blue shadow and pale fire. Below the road, Colorado Springs began waking little pockets of yellow light in kitchen windows, smoke lifting thin from chimneys. Pikes Peak catching the first sun as if nothing bad had ever happened under its watch. Derek trusted none of it. Beauty had a way of standing too close to danger. He slowed near a bend where a drainage culvert ran beneath the road, half hidden by blown snow. The county had marked it with an orange post, now bent and frosting over. The blade hit a ridge of ice. He felt the vibration through the truck frame, then heard something underneath it. Small. Wrong. He lifted his foot from the gas. The sound came again after the engine settled, not the metal shriek of ice against steel, not wind in the culvert. A thin cry. Derek turned off the truck. The silence fell hard. He opened the door and stepped down into snow that reached past his boots with a dry squeak. The cold got inside his collar at once. He stood still listening, the way men learn to listen when the difference between wind and breath matters. There. A weak, broken whimper from the ditch below the culvert. Derek moved before he decided to move. He crossed the shoulder, slid one knee into the snow, and dug with both hands. Ice crust broke under his gloves. Beneath it he found burgundy fabric, stiff with frost, then a tremor, then a nose as black as wet coal. "Easy," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Easy now." He dug faster, carefully scooping snow away from the small body trapped against the concrete mouth of the culvert. A German Shepherd puppy emerged, inch by inch from the white. He could not have been more than 9 weeks old. His coat was sable, smoky gold and gray, with a dark saddle forming along his back, his muzzle black. His chest fur thick, but soaked. His paws too large for him, as if nature had ordered a full-grown dog and sent the parts early. One ear had lifted halfway, the other folded sideways, giving him a look of solemn confusion that would have been funny anywhere but here. His front right paw was scraped raw from clawing at ice. His brown eyes were open. That hit Derek harder than the cold. The pup was not gone inward. He was still watching, still waiting. Derek pulled the fabric loose and felt his stomach tighten. It was not a blanket. It was a sash, burgundy wool with a silver border, the kind worn across the shoulder by the Valor Bells during their winter service at St. Agnes Chapel. Derek knew the color before his mind allowed the name. Valor Bells. Handbells. Coffee in a church basement. Owen tapping rhythm on a paper cup because Derek always came in half a beat too late. Miriam Holtz scolding grown men with the gentleness of a woman who could move mountains by asking them politely to scoot their chairs. Derek stared at the sash. Silver thread ran along one edge in careful stitches. Bring him back to the bells. The word seemed to dim the morning around him. The puppy whimpered, and that saved Derek from standing still too long. Right, he muttered. You first. He unzipped his jacket and lifted the pup with both hands. The body was frighteningly light. The puppy did not bite. He did not fight. He folded into Derek's chest as if warmth had been a promise kept late. Derek tucked the sash around him, pressed him inside the jacket, and held him against the solid heat of his ribs. The puppy's nose touched the underside of his jaw, icy and damp. For a reason Derek could not have explained in court or to a sane friend, he said, Boone. The name came out whole. The puppy's eyes half closed. Boom, Derek repeated quieter. Stay with me. He turned toward the plow truck. Boone made a sharper sound, not loud, urgent. Derek stopped. The pup lifted his head from inside the jacket, trembling so hard the sash quivered, and pointed his black nose down the road toward the turnoff that led to St. Agnes. The chapel sat lower on the mountain built of gray stone among pines, a place Derek had not entered since Owen's memorial. Nothing for you down there, Derek said. Boone cried again when Derek took another step toward the truck. It was not the thin whimper of cold now. It had shape, recognition. Derek had spent years reading breath, tension, pupils, silence. He had learned not to dismiss a small change in a living body because small changes often shouted before the world did. He placed Boone carefully on the passenger seat inside his open jacket, started the engine, turned the heat high, and drove 20 feet past the culvert. Boone twisted weakly toward the rear window and let out a breathless cry that made Derek's hands clamp the wheel. Derek stopped. The puppy quieted. The heater hissed. The road ahead shone pale under snow. Derek looked at him. You are 9 pounds of bad judgment. Boone blinked, exhausted and entirely unimpressed. Derek put the truck in reverse and eased back to the culvert. Boone went still, nose pressed into the burgundy sash facing the chapel road. Derek got out again with the puppy inside his jacket and studied the snow beside the ditch. At first, the storm seemed to have erased everything. Then he saw the tire marks, narrower than his truck, fresh enough that the wind had softened but not buried them. They pulled off near the culvert, stopped, angled badly, then went back toward the road. Footprints moved around the ditch, adult size deep at the heel, turning more than once. Someone had stood close enough to hear the puppy, close enough to see the burgundy sash, close enough to pick him up. Derek crouched, his jaw tightening until the muscle jumped. The footprints did not lead into the woods. They led toward St. Agnes. Boone tucked his nose under Derek's chin, one tiny paw caught in the stiff fabric. Derek looked down at the stitched words. Bring him back to the bells. He had spent 2 years trying not to hear bells, not real ones, not memories, not the thin, bright ring of Owen laughing when Derek missed his cue. Now a half-frozen puppy had been left on the one road Derek cleared every Tuesday morning, wrapped in a sash from the one room he had refused to enter, carrying a message aimed at a wound nobody in town was supposed to touch. The rising sun caught a ridge of ice and threw a brief blade of light across the road. Derek stood slowly. "Whoever did this," he said, barely louder than the wind, "picked the wrong mountain." Boone gave no answer. He only breathed against Derek's chest, small and stubborn. Derek carried him back to the truck, laid the sash beside him on the seat, and looked once more at the fading tracks. If the puppy had wandered out in the storm, why had a grown person circled him in the snow and walked away? Morning sharpened over Manitou Springs, bright on the roofs and cruel on the iced gutters, while the mountains kept their blue shadows tucked close. Derek drove home, with Boone inside his jacket, one hand on the wheel, one hand cupped lightly over the trembling shape against his chest, feeling each weak breath as if it were a coded message he had to keep translating until it made sense. His cabin sat above town, on a narrow road lined with scrub oak and ponderosa pine, a small cedar place with a steep roof, a tin chimney, and a view of Pikes Peak that visitors called beautiful, until the road iced and their rental cars became prayer requests. Derek parked beside the woodpile, killed the engine, and sat for 3 seconds before moving. 3 seconds was what he allowed himself when something wanted to become feeling. Then he opened the door and carried Boone inside. The cabin was clean in the severe way of a man who did not trust mess, because mess could invite memory. 2 plates in the cabinet, 1 chair at the kitchen table, though there were 3. Firewood stacked by length, boots aligned near the door. Photos turned face down on the bookshelf because throwing them away had seemed dramatic and looking at them had seemed impossible. In the hall closet, behind winter coats and a box of flares for search and rescue, sat a black handbell case with 2 brass latches. Dust had gathered on it like ash. Derek did not look at it. He set Boone on a towel near the wood stove and fed kindling into the embers until flame caught with a small, hungry sound. The puppy shivered so violently the towel trembled. His sable coat clung damply to his ribs, and the scraped paw twitched whenever it brushed cloth. "All right," Derek said. "Let's make a deal. You do not die on my floor, and I will not lecture you about route selection." Boone blinked his folded ear, giving the response an offended dignity. Derek warmed water, tested it against his wrist, and cleaned the paw with a steadiness that had once belonged to field medicine in worse places. Blood came away pink and thin, no deep cut. Raw ice burned a few torn pads, exhaustion. Derek wrapped the paw loosely in gauze from the first aid kit and found an old syringe dropper in a drawer. A neighbor had once paid him for a generator repair with a bag of puppy supplies after fostering a litter, and he had accepted it because arguing with Mrs. Alvarez took more energy than fixing 3 generators. He warmed diluted formula, touched the dropper to Boone's mouth, and waited. The pup turned away at first. Then the smell reached him. His tongue flicked out. 1 drop. Another. He swallowed. Derek exhaled through his nose.
There you go. Boone took 6 more drops and then rested his chin on the towel as if he had crossed a continent. Maybe he had. Derek should have called animal control. He should have called the county.
He should have called anyone who knew what to do with a missing puppy wrapped in a church sash. From a room full of people Derek had been avoiding with the precision of a military operation. Instead, he called Dr. Sarah Whitcomb. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring with wind in the background and a voice calm enough to make panic feel poorly dressed.
Derek, if this is about the rescue van battery, I told Walt not to leave the hazard lights on during coffee.
Not a battery, Derek said. Puppy. There was one clean pause.
How bad?
Cold, weak front paw scraped. German Shepherd. Maybe 9 weeks.
Keep him warm. Small fluids. No forced feeding. I'm coming. She arrived 38 minutes later in a snow-dusted navy parka, carrying a brown leather medical bag worn at the corners. Sarah Whitcomb was 41, of medium height, with a lean, practical build, dark blonde hair braided at the nape of her neck, and hazel eyes that missed very little, but did not make a performance of noticing.
Her face was kind without being soft. The face of a woman who had held scared horses, old dogs, crying children, and men who pretended they had only come in because their animal was upset. She wore rubber-soled boots, wool gloves, and a gray scarf tucked tight under her chin.
Where is he?
Derek nodded toward the stove.
Sarah knelt near Boone but did not reach for him. She held out the back of her fingers and let him smell her. Boone's body tightened, then loosened a fraction. "Hello, little mountain man," she said. "Nobody is hurrying you." Derek respected that more than he meant to. She checked his gums, listened to his heart, felt along the ribs and belly, examined the paw, lifted each ear, and took his temperature with the quiet efficiency of someone who believed gentleness worked better when it did not announce itself. Boone endured the exam with tragic patience until she looked between his toes. Then he gave a tiny grunt and tried to hide his head beneath Derek's boot.
"Strong heartbeat," Sarah said after a while. "Mild dehydration. Chilled, but not as far gone as he looked. Paw is scraped. No fracture I can feel. He needs warmth, rest, tiny feedings, and a recheck tomorrow." Derek nodded once. Relief moved through him, unwanted but real. Sarah reached for the burgundy sash lying on the chair and went still. It was a small stillness. Derek saw it anyway. Her fingers stopped just before touching the silver border. "You know it," he said. Sarah lifted the sash carefully. The stitched words had darkened as the fabric thawed. "Bring him back to the bells." She read them once. Her mouth tightened. "This is Valor Bells burgundy." Derek looked toward the hall closet despite himself. "I know the color." "Derek, say what you came up against and backed away from." Sarah folded the sash with more care than fabric deserved. Miriam Holt kept a cedar chest full of them at St. Agnes. She handed them out every Advent service. She said men who would never wear choir robes would tolerate a sash if you told them it was functional. The memory struck before Derek could brace. Miriam, silver-haired and small, tapping a pencil on a music stand. Owen, muttering that burgundy made him look like a nervous deacon. Derek, almost smiling. Almost. "Miriam still running people around with a bell mallet?" he asked, though Sarah's face had already answered. "Miriam died 3 weeks ago," Sarah said. "At home. A stroke, we think. Abby found her the next morning." The stove popped. Boone sighed in his sleep. Derek stared at the floorboards. Miriam had called him more than once after Owen died. He had deleted the voicemails, unheard,
because kindness with a familiar voice could be worse than accusation. Sarah watched him, but did not press. Miriam had a German shepherd named Cedar, she said. Sable, female. Gentle, smart, occasionally convinced she was in charge of church administration.
That almost broke the corner of Derek's mouth. Almost. She had pups. About 9 weeks ago. After Miriam died, Cedar and the litter were supposed to move through Paige Donovan's foster network. Temporary placement until the estate cleared. Sarah hesitated. Derek heard the hesitation as clearly as a dropped pan. "How many pups?" he asked. Sarah looked at Boone, then the sash. "The final transfer form lists 4. And him." "Not on the final form." Boone twitched in sleep and dragged his bandaged paw closer to his body. Derek's voice lowered. "How does a puppy disappear from a number?" Sarah's fingers tightened on the sash. "When people are grieving, paperwork can get messy. Animals get moved fast, foster homes fill, records lag behind." Sarah. She met his eyes then, and what he saw there was not cruelty. It was worse. Guilt learning to stand upright. "I should have asked more questions." Before he could answer, Boone woke with a startled whine, pushing himself up on shaking legs. Derek knelt, hand hovering until the pup saw him, then lowered his fingers near the towel. Boone crawled forward and pressed his nose against Derek's boot. That ended the interrogation for the moment. Sarah saw it happen. Her face softened. "He picked a place." "He's cold," Derek said, but he did not move his boot. Sarah left medication feeding instructions and her personal number written on a card. At the door, she stopped with her hand on the knob. Snowlight framed her face, making the worry impossible to hide. "Call Abby Caldwell at St. Agnes," she said. "Why Abby?" "Because Miriam did not do accidental." Then she stepped out, and cold came in before the door shut. Evening settled early. Derek fed Boone every hour in tiny amounts, added wood to the stove, and told himself he was not watching the puppy breathe. Near midnight, wind pressed against the cabin walls. Boone slept beside Derek's boot, wrapped loosely in the burgundy sash. Derek sat on the floor with his back against the couch, because leaving seemed rude, which was ridiculous, and because the puppy woke whenever the floorboards creaked, which was less ridiculous. In the quiet, Derek's gaze drifted to the hall closet. He remembered the handbells, bronze, polished, heavier than they looked. Owen used to say Derek attacked his bell like it owed him money. Without meaning to, Derek hummed 3 notes from the bell that carries home. Boone's eyes opened. Derek stopped. The puppy lifted his head. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Coincidence," Derek said to nobody. Boone struggled to his feet, wobbled, and moved not toward the stove, not toward the food, but toward the hall closet. He stopped before it, pressed one small paw against the door, and looked back at Derek. The old bell case waited in the dark behind that door. Derek's hands closed, not from cold. "No," he said. Boone flinched. Derek shut his eyes and lowered his voice. "Not that." Boone sank down in front of the closet, exhausted by the effort, his folded ear resting against the wood. Derek crossed the room and knelt beside him. For a long moment, he touched the puppy instead of the door. "I do not ring that one anymore," he whispered. Boone only watched him, warm-eyed and baffled, as if bells were not memories or punishment or unfinished apologies, only sound that had once meant safety. The next morning came clear and brittle. The kind of Colorado winter morning that made the sky look polished while every shaded step tried to kill you.
Boone was still alive, and more than that, hungry enough to lick softened food from a saucer, sneeze when it stuck to his black muzzle, and stare at Derek as if the entire culinary failure belonged to him personally. Derek felt something move in his chest that might have become a laugh if it had been given permission. "I accept your review," he said. Boone sneezed again. After the second feeding, after the bandage check, after Derek had run out of reasons to circle the phone like it might detonate, he called St. Agnes. Abby Caldwell answered with noise behind her folding chairs, scraping a kettle, whistling someone in the distance, asking where the extra blankets had gone. Her voice was warm, but frayed at the edges. "St. Agnes office, this is Abby." "Derek Langford." Silence arrived with weight. Not confusion. Recognition. "Derek."
Abby Caldwell was 46. Average height, with chestnut hair usually pinned low, and imperfectly brown eyes made soft by fatigue rather than weakness, and the kind of steady face people trusted with keys, casseroles, and bad news. Derek remembered her in cardigans, with sleeves pushed up, moving through the St. Agnes basement with a clipboard under one arm and a coffee pot in the other, feeding veterans, correcting sheet music, and translating Miriam Holt's gentle commands into practical action. He pictured her now, before she spoke again, probably in boots damp from snow, one pen behind her ear, trying not to sound as if his name had opened a drawer she had nailed shut. "I found a puppy," Derek said. Another silence. "Where?" "Goldcamp Road, wrapped in a Valor Bells sash." Abby inhaled. It was small, but the phone carried it. "Was it burgundy with silver thread?" "You know it." "Derek." There was a message. "Bring him back to the Bells." Something shifted on her end. Paper sliding, maybe a hand against a desk. "Is he sable one ear slow to come up?" Derek looked at Boone, who had fallen asleep with his chin on Derek's boot, as if boots were a recognized branch of medicine. "Yes." "Oh, Lord." Abby did not say it theatrically. She said it like a prayer that had missed its turn and arrived late. "You know whose he is." "I know who his mother was." "Cedar." "Yes." Derek waited. Abby's breathing shook, then steadied. "I cannot explain over the phone. You can start." "Miriam said something before she died." Abby's voice dropped. "She said if one of Cedar's pups ever found you, nobody was to turn him away. She said some bells come back through paws before hands." Derek looked toward the hall closet. His mouth went dry. "That sounds like Miriam." "She also left something for you. I should have called." "Why didn't you?" Abby did not hide behind a quick answer. That made it harder to be angry cleanly. "Because Grant said to wait." "Because the room was locked." "Because I was tired of doing the brave thing 10 minutes after it would have helped." Boone opened one eye, then closed it again. Derek stared at the burgundy sash folded beside the stove. "I'll come." "Bring him," Abby said. "Please." St. Agnes Chapel stood on a slope below the pines, a gray stone building with a red door, narrow stained glass windows, and a bell tower too small to impress anyone but the wind. Snow lay thick on the roof and along the low wall beside the walkway. Beyond it, Pikes Peak rose white and massive, watching over Colorado Springs with the calm of something too old to apologize. Derek parked across the street and sat with the engine running. Boone rested in a crate lined with towels, and the burgundy sash looking stronger than he had yesterday, though still soft with baby fur and too solemn for his size.
One ear leaned forward as if listening to the chapel. The other remained folded, committed to its own theology. "We go in,"
Derek said. "We look, we leave." Boone blinked. Derek shut off the engine because even he did not believe himself. Abby was waiting inside the front doors. She wore a dark green wool coat over a cream sweater, brown trousers, and snow boots dusted white at the toes. Her chestnut hair had escaped its pin in small strands around her face. When she saw Derek, her eyes went first to him, then to the crate, then to the sash. She covered her mouth with one hand. "He has Cedar's eyes." Derek glanced down at Boone differently, as if the puppy had just been returned to a family he did not know he had. Abby crouched, careful not to crowd the crate. Boone sniffed toward her tail, giving one uncertain tap. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You made it farther than any of us deserved." Derek heard that. He saved it for later. The chapel smelled of wax, old wood, coffee, wet wool, and the faint mineral cold of stone walls. A bulletin board advertised a veterans' breakfast, a grief group, and the winter warming room opening soon. Derek recognized the hallway to the basement before his feet reached it. His body did too. Muscles tightened in old sequence. There had been nights when he and Owen walked this hall together, pretending they had only come because Miriam was impossible to refuse. Owen would carry 2 mugs of coffee and insult both. Derek would say nothing and drink his anyway. The Valor Bells practice room waited behind a double door near the fellowship hall. A paper sign hung crooked on it. Rehearsals postponed. Abby took a key from her pocket and paused before the lock. "Grant did not want anyone in here until the board meeting." Grant can want from a distance. Abby looked at him, and for 1 second the old practical fire returned to her tired face. "I missed that tone less than I thought." The lock clicked. Fluorescent lights flickered on. The room had not changed enough. Long tables stood in a horseshoe, padded with dark cloth where the bells rested during practice. Folding chairs sat behind them. A whiteboard near the wall still held Miriam's handwriting, elegant and slanted, listing winter service pieces. At the bottom, "The bell that carries home" had been crossed through with a single hard line, not erased, crossed out. Derek set the crate down. Boone pawed at the door. Derek hesitated, then opened it. "Stay close." Boone stepped out, carefully bandaged paw touching the floor as if negotiating with it. He sniffed the table legs, the cloth, the metal racks, a box of music folders, the place near the piano where Cedar must have slept. He did not run. He did not become a miracle. He followed scent like a small animal in a room full of ghosts. Then he moved toward the back row of chairs and stopped beneath a music stand near the wall. Derek knew that stand. Owen had kept the low bells there, claiming bass notes belonged in the back because they had dignity and better access to snacks. Boone lowered his nose to the stand leg and made a soft, broken sound. Abby turned away fast. "Cedar used to lie there during practice," she said. "Owen fed her bits of biscuit under the table and thought Miriam did not know. Miriam knew everything. She let him live because Cedar looked happy." The memory came warm and painful, not sharp enough to stab, too tender to ignore. Boone lay beneath the stand, chin on his paws, and closed his eyes. Derek crouched to check the bandage. As he reached under the stand, his glove brushed rough marks in the wood of the support rail. He tilted his head. Letters had been scratched there, uneven and old, pressed with something dull. O-P-D-L. Ring the last measure. Derek went still. Abby crouched beside him, saw it, and whispered, "Oh." Owen Price, Derek Langford. Ring the last measure.
Derek looked at the crossed-out title on the board. The room seemed suddenly too small for air. He had spent 2 years making Owen's last call into a closed door.
Now the room had produced a message from under a music stand low enough that only a man kneeling beside a hurt puppy would find it. The door opened behind them. Abby stood quickly. Grant Ellis stepped inside in a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes damp with slush, and a face arranged into the calm of a man who believed control was a form of service. He was 56, average height, solid through the middle with salt and pepper hair combed neatly back, a clean-shaven jaw, and pale blue eyes tired by responsibility and sharpened by fear.
"I thought we agreed this room would remain closed," he said. Abby's chin lifted. "Derek had a right to see it." Grant looked from her to Derek to Boone beneath the stand. Something flickered in his face when he saw the puppy. Recognition. Regret. Then the shutters came down. Rights are not always the same as wisdom. Derek rose to his full height. He did not step forward. He did not need to. "I found him freezing on Gold Camp Road. So I heard."
Wrapped in Miriam's sash. Grant folded his gloved hands. That is troubling. People keep using careful words around a half-dead puppy. Grant's jaw tightened. Careful words prevent careless damage.
Abby took a breath. Miriam left Derek a key. Grant looked at her sharply. "You should not have told him that." Derek's voice dropped. "There it is." Grant turned toward the whiteboard, his eyes stopping on the crossed-out title. "Miriam believed every buried truth was a seed. I admired her. I also buried some things because not everything that grows is healing." "She is dead," Derek said. "Hard to protect her from being wrong." Grant looked back at him. "It is very easy to use the dead to justify hurting the living. The warming room opens next week. We have donors, county partners, veterans depending on this place for heat, rides, counseling, referrals. If rumors start spreading about missing animals, hidden recordings, and Miriam's state of mind before she died,
People will pull back. So this is money. No, Grant said, and for the first time anger cracked the polished surface. This is men who will sleep in cars if we lose the grant. Silence moved through the room. Boone lifted his head and gave one quiet whine. Derek looked at Grant and hated that the man was not simple. Fear made villains easier. This was not that. Grant's voice softened. "Let the room rest, Derek." Derek glanced at Boone at the scratched message at the crossed-out song. "Owen is not resting in this room." The sentence surprised him. It seemed to surprise everyone. Abby's eyes filled. Grant said nothing for a second too long. Then he buttoned his coat. "The board meets Friday. Until then, do not disturb anything else." "You can ask," Derek said. Grant looked at Abby. "I can lock the room again." Abby folded her arms. "Then bring snacks. I will be inside it." For a second, Derek almost smiled. Grant saw that he had lost this round and hated it politely. At the door, he paused without turning. "Miriam was a good woman," he said. "Good women can still leave matches in dry grass." Then he left. The door closed with a soft click. Abby exhaled like she had been holding up part of the ceiling. She reached into her coat and drew out a small envelope, worn at the corners from being handled too often. Derek's name was written on it in Miriam's elegant hand. Inside was a brass key tied to burgundy thread. Abby nodded toward the locked instrument cabinet behind the riser. "She said if you came back, you would know whether to open it." Derek looked at Boone.
The puppy had gone back to sleep under Owen's stand, breathing softly in the room Derek had spent 2 years avoiding. Derek closed his fingers around the key. "Show me."
Afternoon light slid pale through the basement windows of St. Agnes, turning drifting snow outside into a slow silver curtain. The practice room felt warmer after Grant left, but not easier. Warmth only made the old smells rise. Wool pads, brass polish, coffee grounds, dust in the radiator, the faint sweet wax from chapel candles upstairs. Derek stood before the instrument cabinet behind the low riser with Miriam's key in his palm and Boone leaning against his boot, as if the puppy had already chosen the only safe landmark in a room full of human weather. Abby stood a few steps behind him, arms wrapped tight around herself. She had taken off her coat, revealing a cream sweater with a snag near one cuff and a coffee stain she had probably not noticed. "You do not have to open it right now," she said. Derek looked at the small brass lock. "Yes," he said. "I do." The key turned on the first try. The cabinet door opened with a dry, wooden sigh. Inside were rows of handbells in soft blue covers, folders of sheet music, a tin of spare pencils, 2 lint rollers, a cracked metronome, and a small digital recorder sitting on a folded burgundy sash. Beside it lay a low C handbell, darker than the others, its handle worn smooth, its bronze skirt marked by a thin crack near the lip. A note rested beneath the bell. Derek lifted it. Miriam's handwriting remained neat, even in command. "If Derek returns, let him hear the measure he buried." Abby read it over his shoulder and sat down suddenly in the nearest chair. "I knew there was something," she said. "I did not know what." Derek believed her, not because he trusted easily, but because fear had a scent of its own, and Abby's was not the sour fear of a liar caught. It was the exhausted fear of a person who had waited too long to do what she already knew was right. He set the recorder on the padded table. His thumb hovered over the play button. The room seemed to lean in. Boone sniffed the cracked bell and sneezed at dust. Abby gave a tiny laugh that broke apart almost at once. "Miriam kept everything," she said. "Broken pencils, old bulletins. One napkin Owen wrote a terrible rhyme on because she said history should remember crimes, too." Derek pressed play. Static came first, soft and thin. Then a scrape of chairs, a man's cough. Miriam's voice, small through the speaker, and warm enough to change the air. "From measure 42, gentlemen. And Owen, if you glare at the low C any harder, it will not apologize." Laughter moved through the recording, rough and embarrassed. Owen's voice answered, dry as old leaves. "It knows what it did." Derek's hand closed around the table edge. The room around him did not move, but it changed. Empty chairs filled with remembered weight. Boots shifted. Music pages whispered. Someone cleared his throat too loudly, because feeling had come near and needed to be disguised. Bells began, uneven at first, then cleaner, one tone crossing another, until the bell that carries home emerged from the little speaker. It was not a hymn exactly, not a march. It sounded like light seen through a window after a long walk in snow. Derek had hated it when Owen brought it in, called it too soft, and Owen had grinned that crooked grin and said, "Soft is only weak if you have never needed it." On the recording, the bells moved through the first section. Owen's low note entered late. Miriam said, "Again," with affectionate severity. More laughter. Then the music settled. Derek heard himself somewhere in the middle register, a little stiff, a little careful, trying not to care, and failing. The sound reached under his ribs with cold fingers. Boone, who had been exploring under the table, went still. His uneven ears lifted, one proudly, one with comic uncertainty.
He turned toward the recorder, head tilted, small body alert. Perhaps Cedar had heard this recording while nursing her pups in Miriam's living room.
Perhaps Boone had known the low bell as vibration before his eyes opened. Perhaps safety could be remembered by the body before the mind ever learned a name for it. The bells faded. Owen spoke closer to the recorder now. "If Derek ever hears this, tell him I did not call to be rescued." Derek stopped breathing. Abby's eyes flew to him. On the recording, Owen drew a breath as if stepping toward the rest of the sentence. Then a door opened. A real door, captured on the tape. Hinges complained. Footsteps. A bell fell hard to the floor, ringing wrong, a flat, wounded clang that made Boone yelp and scramble backward. Static burst loud from the recorder, harsh and sudden. Derek reached down and scooped Boone into his arms, feeling the frantic flutter of the puppy's heart against his wrist. "I've got you," he murmured. "Easy." The static roared, swallowed a fragment of Miriam's voice, and cut to silence. Abby stood slowly. "Is it damaged?" Derek rewound 10 seconds and played it again. Owen's voice returned. "If Derek ever hears this, tell him I did not call to be rescued." Breath. Door. Footsteps. Bell falling. Static. Nothing. Derek stared at the recorder. For 2 years he had believed the story had one brutal shape. Owen called. Derek did not answer. Owen died. The end. But this recording had cracked that shape open. Not to be rescued. Then why had Owen called? To say what? To whom? Boone trembled in Derek's arms, not from cold now, but from the noise, from Derek's locked muscles, from the room tightening around them. Abby whispered, "Someone came in." Derek played the moment once more, lower volume. Behind the door, sound beneath the first bite of static, another noise sat hidden. Paper ripping. Derek heard it because he had spent half his life learning to hear what did not belong. Boone heard something too. He lifted his head and stared toward the hallway, then barked once. It was a small bark. It still sounded brave. Derek set him down gently and opened the practice room door. The hallway outside was empty, fluorescent lights humming the bulletin board still, the fellowship hall door half open. A wet footprint marked the tile near the back entrance. Fresh. Abby came to his shoulder. "Grant." Derek crouched. The print was narrow, likely a woman's boot, the tread packed with red grit from the alley. Not Grant's shoes. Boone sniffed the air and turned toward the small office near the rear stairs. The door stood ajar. Inside, a filing cabinet drawer had been pushed closed, badly, leaving a sliver of blue folder visible. Derek crossed the hall, Abby behind him. The office smelled of copier toner, peppermint tea, and damp coats. A framed photo of Valor Bells hung crooked on the wall. Miriam stood front and center, holding 2 bells, silver hair bright under chapel lights. Owen leaned in the back row with one eyebrow raised, probably mid-comment. Derek stood beside him, arms folded, trying to look like he had not enjoyed anything since 1998. He looked away. Abby opened the drawer and pulled the blue folder free. The tab read, "Cedar Litter, Temporary Foster." Inside were vaccination records, feeding notes, a foster transfer form, and a page of supply lists. Derek flipped through with quiet speed. 4 males, 1 female, he read. Temporary transfer authorized. Foster coordinator, Paige Donovan. He stopped. Page 2, page 3, page 5. Where is page 4? Abby shut her eyes. I hoped I counted wrong.
Derek looked at the torn staple edge. You did not. Abby leaned against the desk, color draining from her face. I called Paige after Miriam died. She said paperwork goes missing all the time. People say that when paperwork is the least missing thing. Abby did not defend Paige. That told him enough. Derek's phone buzzed, then hard against the silence. Sarah Whitcomb. He answered without greeting. You called Abby?
Sarah's voice came tight through the speaker. No, Grant called me. He said you were in the practice room. Abby mouthed Grant. Derek held up a hand. Why did that bring you here? Because he said you found the recorder. Sarah stepped into the office doorway before the call fully ended. Snow melting on the shoulders of her navy parka, braid damp at the ends, medical bag in one hand. She looked composed for half a second. Then she saw the blue folder in Derek's hand and the recorder visible on the table through the open practice room door. The composure thinned. I came to check Boone, she said. You came because someone was afraid I heard a dead man speak. Sarah looked at Boone, who had padded over to Derek's boot and sat heavily on it, his bandaged paw raised like an accusation he did not understand. Her face softened, then tightened again. What did the recording say? Owen said he did not call to be rescued. Then someone came in. Then the tape cut. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Abby's voice sharpened. You knew there was more. Not the recording, Sarah said. I did not know about that. Derek believed her. Barely. But Sarah stepped into the office and closed the door behind her, shutting out the hallway hum. I knew Miriam wanted one of Cedar's puppies to find Derek if Derek was willing. She told me not to offer directly. She said he would refuse anything that sounded like mercy. Derek's jaw worked once. She was right. I told her animals are not messages, Sarah said. She told me sometimes they are bridges, and sometimes bridges get to choose who crosses. Boone leaned harder against Derek's boot. Abby's eyes filled, but Derek kept his voice flat. And after Miriam died, everything became paperwork. Estate questions, ownership of Cedar, foster space. Paige was overloaded. Grant wanted the animals moved quietly before donors and board members began asking whether Miriam had left a mess. Did she? Abby asked, hurt. Sarah looked at her. She left living things. That landed. Derek held up the folder. Boone was missing from the final count. Sarah's mouth tightened. I noticed the number was wrong 2 days later. And did nothing. I asked Paige. She said one pup was combined under Cedar's intake number and the corrected form was coming. That satisfied you? Sarah's eyes met his. No, but I wanted it to. The room went very still. Not evil, not malice. Cowardice wearing a clean coat. Derek looked at the folder, then the recorder. Who else did Owen call that night? Sarah flinched. Abby turned toward her slowly. Sarah. The veterinarian's voice dropped. Derek, Miriam, and Frank Caldwell. Abby went pale. My father. Sarah nodded. He was listed in the emergency notes as a requested contact. I saw the record by accident through the clinic network when the hospital sent a correction notice. I should have told you. Abby put one hand against the desk. Derek felt the old story widen beneath his feet. His missed call was no longer a private cell. It was a hallway with many locked doors. Boone lifted his head and looked toward the chapel stairs, ears uneven, eyes steady on Derek.
He did not know Frank Caldwell. He did not know Owen's final night. He only knew humans had raised their voices, and Derek was the closest warmth. Derek picked up the blue folder. Where does Frank live? Abby did not answer at once. That silence gave him the address before she did.
Clouds thickened again over Colorado Springs by late afternoon, laying a pewter lid across the mountains and turning the windows of St. Agnes into dull mirrors. In the small rear office, the heater clicked like a nervous metronome while Derek, Abby, and Sarah stood around the open Foster folder with Boone asleep on Derek's boot, his bandaged paw draped across the leather as if claiming legal custody. Derek read the pages again because reports often confessed on the second pass. Cedar, adult female German Shepherd, sable coat, temporary estate transfer. 5 pups listed in Miriam's early notes, 4 pups listed on the final county form. 1 page missing. 1 sash found in the snow. He tapped the torn staple mark. Who filed the final transfer? Abby took a breath. Paige Donovan. Sarah's face tightened before Abby finished the name. Derek saw it. Tell me. Abby rubbed both hands down her sleeves. Paige runs the foster network for this side of the county. Dogs, sometimes cats. Once a goat nobody admitted owning. She's good with animals, overworked, always carrying 3 crates and answering 5 calls. Good and overworked can still leave a puppy in a ditch. Abby did not argue. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'll call. Paige answered after 6 rings with barking in the background and a voice that sounded as if it had been stapled together by exhaustion. Sarah, if this is about the collie transport, I told Walt I cannot make a crate appear out of prayer and plywood. Paige, I'm here with Derek Langford and Abby Caldwell. The barking on the other end continued. Paige did not speak. Derek leaned toward the phone. I'm the man who found the missing puppy. The barking stopped, or maybe Paige moved into another room. If you found a puppy, you need to contact Animal Control and have him scanned. He was wrapped in a Valor Bells sash. I don't know anything about a sash. But you handled Cedar's transfer. I coordinated it, Paige said. The word hardening. That is not the same thing as personally handling every animal every second. Paige Donovan was 50, short and sturdy, with cropped auburn hair threaded heavily with gray, quick brown eyes that could soften around a hurt animal and sharpen around a human complaint, and hands always marked by leash burns, iodine stains, or both. Derek had seen her once at a winter supply drive wearing a burgundy parka, black waterproof pants, and boots that looked permanently offended by mud. She had moved like a woman used to being blamed by people with full night's sleep. That did not make her innocent. How many pups did you receive? Derek asked. I do not have the file in front of me. You coordinated it. And I said I do not have the file in front of me. How many did you count when you unloaded Cedar? The line carried a breath. In that breath, Derek heard a dozen excuses trying to choose the best shoes. I need to check my records. Page 4 is missing from ours. Paige's voice rose. Pages go missing in church offices all the time. People move things. Volunteers make copies. Grant takes folders to board meetings and brings back half of them with coffee rings. Abby closed her eyes as if the last sentence had landed too close to truth. Derek kept his tone even. A puppy was outside in a storm. I did not leave a puppy outside. That is not what I asked. Another pause. Then Paige said, much quieter, I need to go. The line clicked dead. Sarah lowered the phone slowly. Boone twitched in his sleep. The little movement seemed to accuse the whole room without intending to. Abby sank into the desk chair. She sounded scared. Scared people are still responsible for what fear does with their hands, Derek said. The words came out before he could soften them, and once spoken they seemed to turn around and look at him. His phone in the dark. Owen's name bright on the screen. Morning is soon enough. Sarah watched him with a veterinarian's gentleness and a woman's caution. There is more. Derek looked at her. That answer keeps multiplying. Sarah folded her arms, then let them fall. Miriam told me before she died that Cedar's last male pup should go to Derek only if Derek chose him freely. She was very clear. Not as a gift from Owen, not as an apology, not as a duty. She said grief makes people accept living things for the wrong reasons. Abby whispered. She wrote that down? I don't know. Sarah's mouth tightened. She told me. I told her she was building a plan out of too many people who might not behave. She said God uses stubborn people because obedient ones are too rare. Abby gave a watery laugh, then covered her mouth. Derek looked down at Boone. The puppy had no opinion about theology. He was breathing through his nose with a faint whistle. After Miriam died, Sarah continued, Grant wanted Cedar and the pups moved before the estate inspection. He said it would prevent legal complications. Paige had space if the transfer happened fast. Abby was trying to organize the funeral, the warming room, the board packets, everything. I told myself temporary foster was safer than delay. And when the number was wrong, Derek asked. Sarah's fingers pressed into her palm. I asked Paige. She said she had the pup under Cedar's intake and would correct the form. I wanted that to be enough because if it was not, then I had failed Miriam. You did, Derek said. Abby flinched. Sarah did not. Her eyes filled, but she nodded once. Yes. The clean acceptance made the room quieter. Boone woke, pushed himself upright, and gave a small, annoyed lick to his bandage. Derek bent immediately. No chewing. Boone paused mid-lick, stared at him, and very slowly lowered his tongue as if obeying under protest. Abby made the smallest sound, not quite a laugh, but a little air escaped the room's grief. Sarah knelt to check the bandage and said, He is stronger. Derek watched her unwrap and rewrap the gauze. He trusted her hands more than her choices. That was uncomfortable. You said Owen called Frank Caldwell, he said. Abby stiffened. Sarah looked at her before answering. Yes. Abby's father had once been part of everything St. Agnes did. Derek remembered Frank Caldwell in the back of the room, a retired Army medic with a bass bell in one hand and a joke he never delivered fully because Miriam would give him the look. Then Frank vanished after Owen's funeral before Derek did, as if he had stepped out the side door of the same pain and taken a different road. Abby's face had gone pale. Why would Owen call Dad? I do not know everything, Sarah said. The emergency note listed requested contacts: Derek, Miriam, Holt, Frank Caldwell. It also said Raymond Memorial, but that was probably the hospital system mislabeling the old memorial wing. Did Frank answer? Derek asked. Sarah looked at the floor. I don't know. I only saw the corrected contact log, not call outcomes. Abby pressed her fingers to her eyes. He never told me. Where is he? Derek asked. Manitou. Behind his clock shop. Abby shook her head quickly. He won't talk to you. He barely talks to me. He sends checks for the warming room and pretends money can say Merry Christmas. People use what they have. No, Derek. Her voice cracked in a way that cut through his patience. He uses what keeps him away. That stopped him.
Boone leaned against his shin, warm and unsteady. Derek lowered his hand to the pup's back. There it was again. The chain he had begun to see: Grant protecting, funding, Paige protecting the foster network, Sarah protecting Miriam's hope, Abby protecting a room, Frank protecting whatever had made him disappear, and Derek protecting himself from one ringing phone by calling it exhaustion. Every person holding one link and pretending it was not attached to anyone else. Abby reached for her coat.
I'll come with you. Derek shook his head. No. He's my father. Which is why he will spend the first half hour hurting you and the second half defending himself. I need the part after that.
Abby stared at him. You say considerate things like you are throwing rocks.
I've been told.
By Owen? Derek's hand stilled on Boone's back. Abby regretted it instantly. I'm sorry. Derek picked up the foster folder and slid the torn pages back inside. Do not be. You are not wrong. Outside, snow began tapping the office window soft as fingernails. Sarah put Boone gently into the crate and tucked the burgundy sash around him. The puppy yawned so wide his whole face seemed to come apart, then settled with his nose still aimed toward Derek. Abby wrote Frank's address on a scrap of church stationery and handed it over. Her hand shook. If he says something cruel, remember he learned it from pain before he learned it from pride. Derek folded the paper once. I know the language.
He carried Boone out through the practice room. The crossed-out title on the whiteboard seemed darker in the low light. The Bell That Carries Home. Near the door, Derek stopped and looked back at Owen's old stand. Ring the last measure. He had come to St. Agnes because a puppy would not stop crying in a truck. Now he was leaving with a missing page, a damaged recording, a foster coordinator who hung up a veterinarian's confession, and the name of a father who might hold the rest of Owen's unfinished sentence. Boone stirred in the crate and gave one sleepy tap of his tail against the plastic wall. Small. Certain. Derek stepped into the snow with the strange sense that the mountain had not finished speaking, and that this time, silence would not be allowed to answer for everyone. By late afternoon, Manitou Springs looked like a town tucked into a snow globe someone had shaken too hard and then forgotten to set down. Old storefronts leaned into the narrow streets. Icicles hung from awnings over crystal shops and coffee counters, and steam rose from storm drains in ghostly threads. Derek drove slowly past tourists, taking photographs of frozen fountains, and locals walking with the careful footwork of people who had already fallen once this season and did not intend to provide a second show. Boone rode in the crate beside him, wrapped in the burgundy sash and a gray towel, stronger now, but still small enough to make the truck cab feel too large around him. His sable fur had dried into soft ridges along his neck and chest, one ear lifted with growing confidence, while the other folded sideways in stubborn refusal. He watched the town through the crate door, nose twitching at every passing smell. You are not in charge of navigation, Derek said. Boone placed his bandaged paw against the crate door and looked deeply unconvinced. Frank Caldwell's clock shop sat behind a row of old buildings on a side street that climbed toward the foothills. The sign above the narrow door read Caldwell Repair, though half the gold paint had worn away. In the window, clocks of every size stood with their hands pointing to different accusations. Some ticked, some did not. Behind the shop, connected by a covered walkway, stood a small apartment with a porch shoveled just wide enough for one man and no visitors. Derek parked near a snowbank and sat for a moment. He could feel the old anger under his ribs, not hot, never that easy, but heavy and clean-edged. Owen had called Frank. Owen had called Miriam. Owen had called him.
For 2 years, Derek had carried the missed call like a private stone polished by guilt until it fit his hand perfectly. Now other hands had been on it. That should have made it lighter. It did not.
He lifted Boone's crate and crossed the frozen walkway. Before he knocked, he heard clocks inside 100 small hearts refusing to beat together. He knocked twice. A voice behind the door barked, "Closed! Not here for a clock. Then I am extra closed. Derek Langford." The clocks seemed louder during the silence. A bolt slid. The door opened 4 inches. Frank Caldwell looked out with one blue eye and half a frown. He was 68 tall, but bent slightly forward through the shoulders as if years of leaning over workbenches and wounded men had taught his spine suspicion. His face was weathered and narrow, with a white mustache trimmed unevenly deep lines around the mouth and eyes the washed blue of winter sky after bad news. His gray hair stood in rough waves flattened on one side, and he wore a red flannel shirt under a brown canvas vest, dark work pants, wool socks, and slippers that had seen better decisions. A scar ran from the base of his thumb across one wrist, pale against the skin. He looked at Derek, then at the crate. The frown changed before he could stop it. "Where did you get that pup? Goldcamp Road?" Frank opened the door wider. He did not invite Derek in. He stepped back. For men like Frank and Derek, that counted. The apartment smelled of coffee machine oil, wood dust, and old paper. Clocks covered the walls, some grand, some cheap, some disassembled on the table with their brass insides laid out like careful organs. A stove burned in the corner. One mug sat by the sink. No photographs showed except one turned face down near the lamp. Frank pointed toward the stove. "Set 'em there." Derek put the crate down and opened it. Boone stepped out, carefully, sniffed the air, and made straight for Frank's slippers. He pressed his nose to the old wool, inhaled, and sat down on Frank's foot with the gravity of a judge. Frank went still. "Well," he muttered, "that is rude." Boone leaned his chin on the slipper. There was no defense against it, and both men knew. Frank looked away first. "Cedar used to come here with Miriam. I fixed the chapel bell rope, some music stands, whatever else she decided God wanted repaired, for free. That dog would plant herself right there and shed on my feet like a tax." He moved to a trunk beneath the window, lifted the lid, and pulled out a dark wool blanket with sable hair still clinging to it. "She slept on this when Miriam stayed late." He laid it near the stove. Boone sniffed the blanket once. His whole body softened. He stepped onto it, circled clumsily, and sank down with a sigh too large for a creature his size. His eyes closed. Derek and Frank watched him sleep. It was a small thing. It quieted the room better than any command. Derek took off his gloves. "Owen called you the night he died." Frank's mouth tightened. A clock on the wall clicked out of rhythm, then found itself again. "Yes." No denial. That should have pleased Derek. It only sharpened him. "You told anyone?" "No." "Why?" Frank moved to the stove and adjusted a log that did not need adjusting. "Because by morning he was gone, and everyone was already bleeding. I did not see the use in passing around another knife." Derek stepped closer. Men love calling fear mercy. Frank turned. The old medic's eyes sharpened. "You came loaded." "I came informed." "No, you came angry, because anger stands up straighter than grief." Derek's hands closed once, then opened. Frank saw it and did not retreat.
Owen did not call because he thought you could save him, Frank said. Derek said nothing. He had chest pain for weeks. Miriam nagged him. I nagged him. He joked it off, said his heart had filed a complaint about Chapel coffee. That sounded like Owen so exactly that Derek hated it. Frank sat heavily in a chair near the workbench. He called because he wanted to tell you the truth about the service dog. The room narrowed. Derek's jaw hardened.
The service dog application belonged to a period he rarely let memory touch. After leaving the Navy, before he had learned how to sleep more than 3 hours before discipline stopped working as medicine, he had applied through a veteran support program for a trained dog. The denial letter had arrived on thick paper with polite sentences. Not currently recommended. He had read it twice, then folded it so carefully he tore the crease. It had felt like being told even an animal should not have to stay with him. The committee denied it, Derek said. Frank rubbed his thumb over the scar on his wrist. They did. Owen influenced them. Derek did not move. Boone slept on Cedar's blanket, one oversized paw twitching. Explain before I choose my own version. Owen knew someone on the review board. Not enough to order anything, enough to raise concern. He told them you were not ready, not dangerous, not unworthy. Too close to the edge, he said. Too alone. He was afraid you would make that dog the only thing between you and a grave. Derek looked at Boone because he needed something in the room that had not betrayed him. So he decided for me. Yes. And you knew. After. Miriam. Frank nodded. She knew after too. Derek laughed once without humor. A church basement full of people protecting me from my own life. Efficient. Frank's face folded under something old. Owen believed he was saving you. Love with a crowbar is still breaking and entering. Yes, Frank said quietly. That answer stopped Derek more than an argument would have. Frank leaned forward, elbows on knees. He regretted taking the choice from you. Not because he stopped fearing what might happen, because he knew fear had made him arrogant. He called to say that, to say he was sorry for making care into control. Derek turned toward the frosted window. Outside, a couple walked past, laughing, one slipping and catching the other by the sleeve. The world continued its small, unpunished gestures. And you? He asked. Frank closed his eyes. He asked me to come sit with him that night. I said roads were bad and morning would do. I had an old truck with chains in the back, a medic bag by the door, and pride enough to call hesitation wisdom. By morning, he was dead. The clocks kept ticking. Not together. Never together. Derek felt his anger shift, losing its clean edge. It was hard to hate a man standing in the same weather. Abby thinks you left because of Owen. Abby is usually right. It irritates me. Frank looked toward the face-down photograph. She kept asking me to come back to St. Agnes. I sent checks. Checks do not ask you to stand in a room where a man should still be laughing. Boone stirred open one eye and seemed to decide both men were still present enough to trust. He went back to sleep. Frank stood with a stiffness that made him look older than before and crossed to a drawer near the workbench. Owen left this with me 2 weeks before he died. Said if he lost his nerve, I should know what to do. He took out a long white envelope, yellowed at the edges. Derek's name was not on it. That made it worse. Frank held it but did not release it yet. This will not fix anything. I did not ask it to. It may break more. Frank. The old man looked up. Derek's voice was low.
You do not get to decide what breaks me. A knock came at the outer shop door before Frank could answer. Both men turned. Through the glass, Derek saw Abby on the sidewalk, cheeks flushed from cold, and beside her, Grant Ellis in his charcoal coat, looking like a man who had driven too fast and prayed too late. Frank closed his eyes. "Of course," he said. Boone lifted his head from Cedar's blanket, ears uneven as the next locked door arrived, carrying its own key.
Snow began again as evening gathered over Manitou Springs. Soft flakes turning the shop window into a blurred pane of moving white. Frank opened the door before Derek could reach it, and Abby stepped inside. First breath visible, eyes going at once to her father, then to Boone on Cedar's blanket, then to the envelope in Frank's hand. Grant followed more slowly, removing his gloves finger by finger, as if manners might slow what was already happening. "Frank," Grant said, and for once his voice carried no polish. "Please do not give him that." Abby turned on him. "You knew Dad had something." Grant looked at her, then away. "I knew Owen left papers with several people. Miriam told me before she died." Frank gave a dry laugh. "And naturally, you improved the situation by hiding the rest." "I tried to keep St. Agnes from tearing itself apart." Grant's face was pale from the cold, or from fear. Maybe both. "The warming room opens in 6 days. We have county funding, donor money." Volunteer schedules, men already asking if they can come in off the streets when the temperature drops. If this becomes a story about missing puppies and hidden letters, the board panics. Donors hesitate. The county delays review. People freeze while we debate purity. Abby's face changed at that, because the warming room was not an idea to her. It was blankets stacked in closets, soup cans labeled by date. Veterans who came early to sweep floors so no one could say they were only taking. "Do not use them as a shield," she said quietly. Grant flinched. "I am using them as the point." Derek watched him. It would have been easier if Grant were greedy or cruel or secretly pleased by power. He was not. He looked like a man holding a roof beam with both arms and afraid one honest word would bring the building down. Derek disliked him more for being human. Frank held the envelope tighter. "Owen trusted me with this." "Owen was dying and guilty," Grant said. Miriam was grieving and hopeful. Neither of them had to sit through board meetings, grant audits, families asking why private letters were being passed around like church bulletins. "No one is passing anything around," Abby said. "Derek deserves to know what belongs to him." Grant's eyes flashed. "And if what belongs to him sends him out that door for good? If Frank collapses under what he has avoided? If you lose the one place where half these men know how to ask for help?" Abby stepped closer to him, small against his coat, but not smaller in the room. "A healing room cannot be held together by locked drawers." Grant answered too fast. "A healing room cannot survive if everyone bleeds in public." Derek's voice cut in low. "No one is asking for public." Grant looked at him. "Not yet. Secrets are never private long in a church. They grow legs during coffee hour." Boone stood then, unsteady but determined, and padded from Cedar's blanket to Derek's boot. He leaned against it and sat with an exhausted sigh, as if the adults had become too loud to trust with vertical decisions. The absurd dignity of it quieted everyone. Frank looked down and his mouth softened. "That pup has better meeting skills than most boards." Abby made a broken little sound that might have been laughter. Derek bent and brushed 2 fingers along Boone's back. The puppy leaned into the touch, present and warm,
not caring about donors or committees or old men with envelopes. Grant saw the gesture. Something in his face sank. "Miriam wanted that dog to reach you," he said. "But she also wrote that you had to choose him. Not Owen's guilt, not hers, not yours." Derek looked up. "You read her notes?" Grant's silence answered. Abby stared. "Grant." He rubbed one hand over his mouth. "After Miriam died, I found a box in her office. Letters, placement notes, a copy of Owen's last music. I told myself I was securing sensitive material until the estate cleared."
Then the Grant review moved up. Paige called about a possible missing pup. Sarah started asking questions. It all became one more thing I had to contain before it harmed people. "Contain," Derek repeated. "Good word, very clean." Grant's shoulders lowered. "I know." That admission took some force from the room. Frank extended the envelope toward Derek. Grant inhaled sharply but did not move. Derek took it. Inside was a single folded sheet, not the full confession he had braced for. It held several measures of bell notation in Owen's uneven hand, and one sentence beneath it. "Ask Miriam why the pup must choose him before he chooses the guilt." Derek read it twice. Boone pressed his nose to Derek's shin. The sentence did not solve anything. It made the knot larger. The puppy was tied to Miriam's plan, Owen's apology, Grant's fear, Paige's missing count, Sarah's silence, Frank's shame, Abby's waiting, and Derek's own refusal to answer a phone. Everyone had put meaning on him, like blankets on a sleeping child, until the child disappeared beneath the weight. Derek looked at Boone. Really looked. The pup's sable fur stuck up along his shoulders. His bandage had slipped a little. One ear had surrendered again and folded sideways. He was not a sign from God written in fur. He was a baby animal who needed food in small amounts, warmth, medicine, and someone who would not use him as proof of anything. The thought landed hard enough to hurt. "Where is Miriam's house?" Derek asked. Abby blinked. "Why?" "Because I want to see where he came from, not where everyone's guilt says he should go." Frank nodded once, slowly. Grant looked as if he wanted to object and had run out of locks. Abby took the envelope from Derek only long enough to see Owen's sentence, then handed it back with care. "Miriam's house is near North Cheyenne Canyon. Yellow place with green shutters. I have the estate key." Her voice shifted when she said it. Grief stepping through. "I have not been back since the inventory. We'll go now." Sarah's voice came from the shop doorway, startling them all. She stood there with snow in her hair, medical bag over one shoulder, and a look that said she had followed before she had decided whether following was wise.
"Boone should not be out long, but if you are taking him into Miriam's house, I want to check him after." Grant gave a tired sigh.
"Does everyone in this town ignore closed signs?"
Frank glanced at his shop window. "Mine says closed. The door is unlocked. Mixed message." For the first time, Grant almost smiled. It faded quickly. Abby looked at her father. "Are you coming?" Frank looked toward the face-down photograph near the lamp, then at Boone. Pain passed through his eyes, old and practiced. "Not yet." Abby's face closed a little. He saw it and winced. "Abby." She held up a hand. "I know. Morning will do." The sentence struck the room like a dropped bell.
Frank's mouth opened, then shut. Derek felt the echo in his own bones. Morning would do. The oldest lie in the room. Frank reached for his coat with a rough motion.
Give me 5 minutes. Abby turned away quickly, pretending to study the clocks, but her shoulders shook once. Boone watched them with bright, tired eyes, perhaps wondering why humans needed so many chances to do the obvious thing. They loaded into 2 vehicles, Derek carrying Boone wrapped in Cedar's blanket, Sarah following behind Abby and Frank in her car, Grant trailing because he had no authority left but could not bear to leave. The drive toward Miriam's house wound past dark pines and snow-covered stone walls. The sky lowered. Streetlights came on one by one, small golden circles against the blue evening. Boone slept in Derek's arms, his heartbeat steadier than it had been that morning. At a bend near North Cheyenne Canyon,
Abby's car slowed before a small yellow cottage with green shutters and a porch lined by frozen lavender pots. The house stood quiet beneath snow, not abandoned exactly, but holding its breath. Derek stepped out with Boone. The puppy woke all at once, his nose lifted, his whole body changed. Not fear. Recognition. He pressed his bandaged paw against Derek's arm and leaned toward the front door, making a tiny sound deep in his throat. Abby stared, tears already in her eyes. He remembers. Derek looked at the cottage, at the dark windows, at the snow untouched on the porch, except for the path Abby had once shoveled and not returned to. Boone squirmed again, more urgently, as if the house itself had called his name before any of them had learned it. Derek held him closer and started up the steps. Behind him, Frank whispered something that might have been a prayer. The key slid into the lock. Before Abby could turn it, Boone lifted his scraped paw and tapped the door twice. Soft but certain, like someone asking to be let back into the first place that had ever been home. Miriam Holt's house opened into warmth that was no longer warm. A kind of remembered welcome held in wood, wool, and dust. Outside, evening snow fell over North Cheyenne Canyon in soft blue sheets. But inside the little yellow cottage, the air smelled faintly of lavender, beeswax, old hymnals, and dog fur caught in the corners where no broom had been brave enough to erase it. Abby turned on a lamp by the entry table. Its amber shade filled the front room, slowly revealing a green sofa with a folded quilt over the arm, a piano bench tucked against the wall, though there was no piano. Shelves of music books, framed photographs of Valor Bells, and a row of ceramic mugs hanging beneath a kitchen cabinet, each one from a different church fundraiser Miriam had probably organized with terrifying kindness. Frank stood just inside the door, hat in his hands, eyes fixed on a photograph of Miriam holding 2 handbells and laughing at someone outside the frame. Grant remained near the threshold, as if entering more fully might make him responsible for the dust. Sarah came in last and shut the door gently behind them. Derek crouched and set Boone down. The puppy stood still for 1 second, nose lifted, body trembling with a recognition deeper than memory. Then he moved. Not quickly. He was too tired for that. He crossed the braided rug, slipped once on the polished floor, recovered with offended determination, and made his way to the corner near the south window. There the floorboards were scratched in a half circle. A few sable hairs clung to the baseboard. The sunlight was gone now, but Derek could imagine it falling there in the mornings while Cedar nursed her pups under Miriam's soft commands. Boone lowered his nose to the boards and inhaled. His tail moved once. He lay down in the empty space and rested his chin where something beloved had been. Abby covered her mouth. Sarah looked away. Frank made a sound like a cough and turned toward the bookshelves. Derek's anger did not vanish. It changed. Until that moment, the story had been built from what people had kept from him. Watching Boone fold himself into the outline of his first home, Derek saw the smaller truth underneath. A puppy had lost his mother, his litter, his warmth, and almost his life,
because adults had been late to courage. Abby wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Cedar's bed was there. Miriam moved the piano bench to give the litter room. She said puppies were good for an old house because they reminded the floorboards they still had work. Frank laughed once under his breath. She would say that. The laugh did not survive long. Sarah went to Boone and checked him without moving him much, fingers gentle along the bandage, palm hovering near his ribs. He's tired, but stable. Grant's eyes remained on the floor. Where did Miriam keep her notes? Derek asked. Abby pointed down the short hall.
Sewing room. The sewing room was small and bright, even under evening cloud, crowded with the evidence of Miriam's hands. Stacked fabric sat in neat squares, burgundy wool beside cream linen, silver thread wound around wooden spools, a sewing machine covered with a cloth embroidered in tiny bells. On the wall hung photographs from years of winter services. Derek saw himself in one before he could avoid it, arms folded, expression guarded. Owen beside him with his mouth open, mid-joke. Frank in the back holding a bass bell. Abby at the edge with a clipboard. Miriam in front, beaming as if she had tricked every wounded person in the room into standing near light. Abby opened the desk drawer and lifted out a leather notebook. This was in the inventory list. She handed it to Derek. He did not want to open it. He opened it. The first pages held feeding schedules, weight charts, vet appointments, notes about Cedar's appetite and the puppy's tempers. Miriam had given each pup a temporary name. Button, because she chewed coat buttons. Captain, because he climbed over everyone. Willow, because she slept through noise. Preacher, because he complained during weighing. Stillwater, male sable one ear, slow to rise. Listens for low voices before moving. Settles near the bass bell. Derek looked into the living room. Boone lay in Cedar's old corner, one ear folded, listening, even in exhaustion. He turned the page. Miriam had written possible placements in careful columns, not legal assignments, not commands, but hopes. Beside Stillwater, she had written, Derek Langford only if he chooses. The dog, not the dead. The sentence seemed to clear the dust from the room. Abby read it over his shoulder and whispered, She knew. Grant stepped closer, face drawn. That was in the box. Derek looked at him. Grant's eyes lowered. I read a copy. I should have given it to you, or to Abby, to someone. Yes, Derek said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Sarah leaned against the door frame. Miriam told me grief makes people accept gifts for the wrong reasons. She wanted Cedar healthy, the pups weaned, and Derek to come back on his own. Not cornered. I did not, Derek said. No, Sarah answered softly. You did not. No one rushed to comfort him. He appreciated that. Comfort given too quickly could feel like an attempt to close a wound before it had told the truth. Abby took the notebook and turned another page. There are transport notes. Sarah stiffened. Grant closed his eyes. Derek saw both reactions. Read them. Abby's voice shook. Temporary transfer if estate requires. Cedar anxious in crate. Use reinforced latch. Include burgundy sash with Cedar's bedding. Page to transport after storm clears. She stopped. After storm clears, Sarah said. It did not clear. It shifted. The weather report changed after Page had already loaded. Derek's hands went still. Grant spoke as if the words had been dragged from him. Page stopped on Gold Camp Road to tighten a loose chain on the rear tire. The latch on one small crate had been wired but not replaced. The crate held supplies and one pup while she rearranged space. The sash was in there. Boone slipped out. Abby looked sick.
When did she know? Sarah answered. At the Foster house, Cedar was frantic. The pups were crying. Paige counted in a hurry and told herself the number was right because she needed it to be. That is not counting, Derek said. Sarah lowered her eyes. No. When did she know? He repeated. Grant's voice was barely audible. The next morning. Frank turned from the photograph wall. And she called you. Grant nodded. She was afraid if she filed an incident report, the Foster network would be suspended. There were 14 dogs placed that week, 3 needing medication, 2 emergency intakes waiting. She panicked.
I told her to search quietly for a few hours before filing. Derek stared at him. A few hours. Grant did not defend it. That was almost worse. Then the search failed. The storm buried tracks. By then the truth looked larger than it had at dawn. Truth does that when you feed it delay. Frank said it quietly, but the words landed hard. From the living room came a soft thump. Derek went back at once. Boone had tried to climb onto Miriam's green armchair and failed. His front paws hooked on the cushioned back legs, pushing bandaged paws sliding uselessly. He gave a determined grunt. Despite everything, Abby let out a small, broken laugh. Derek crossed to help him, but Boone turned, saw him, and dropped back to the floor. Then the puppy did something that stopped Derek where he stood. He left Cedar's corner. He left Miriam's chair. He came slowly across the rug to Derek, sat on his boot, and leaned his small shoulder against his leg. Not hunger. Not cold. Not panic. Choice. The room went quiet around it. Derek crouched and laid one hand gently on Boone's back. Boone leaned harder. For 3 days, people had spoken of him as Miriam's plan, Owen's apology, Cedar's lost pup, Grant's liability, Paige's mistake, Sarah's guilt, Derek's bridge. But Boone did not know how to be any of those things. He knew warmth, scent, food, low voices, and the man who had lifted him out of snow. Something in Derek cracked open, not cleanly, not painlessly, but open all the same. No more, he said. Abby looked at him. Derek? He lifted Boone carefully. He is not Miriam's message. He is not Owen's apology. He is not a Grant problem or a missing line on a form. He is alive. Nobody spoke. Derek looked at each of them. He was cold because everyone waited. Not one monster, not one villain. Just people choosing one more hour, one more phone call, one more quiet search, one more locked drawer. His voice stayed calm, which made it heavier. I have done it too. Frank looked down. Abby's eyes filled. Sarah's face opened with grief. Derek held Boone close and felt the puppy's heartbeat against his forearm. I saw Owen calling. I told myself morning would do. The words entered the room softly, but once there, nothing could be as it had been. Boone pressed his nose into Derek's sleeve. Abby returned to the sewing room, wiping her eyes. There is a lower drawer, she said after a moment. It was tied shut. I never opened it. Derek followed with Boone in his arms. A loop of silver thread held the drawer closed. Abby unwound it carefully and pulled. Inside lay envelopes, a few, not many. Abby Caldwell, Frank Caldwell, Grant Ellis, Sarah Whitcomb, Paige Donovan, Derek Langford. Beneath them sat a larger envelope in Owen Price's uneven handwriting. For the last measure, if I lose my nerve. Derek stared at it.
Everyone in the room had hidden something and called it protection. Now the same choice had been placed in his hands.
Night settled over Miriam's cottage, with snow at every window softening the world, until the little house seemed to float outside of time. In the sewing room, under the warm circle of the desk lamp, Derek held Owen's large envelope and felt every eye in the room trying not to ask what he would do. Boone shifted in his arms, sleepy and trusting, then licked the cuff of Derek's jacket, with the serious attention of a pup who believed fabric required medical care. "That's not food," Derek murmured. Boone tried once more because hope is important. Abby almost laughed and almost cried instead. Frank stood near the doorway, arms folded, looking at the envelope as if it might speak in a voice he knew too well. Sarah kept one hand on her medical bag, a habit more than a need. Grant had taken off his overcoat, but still held it draped over one arm, as if ready to leave the moment honesty became more expensive than he could bear. Derek looked at the names on Miriam's smaller envelopes. Abby, Frank, Grant, Sarah, Paige, Derek. Owen's packet beneath them felt heavier than paper should. He could put it inside his jacket. He could say, "Not tonight." He could tell himself that some wounds had no business being opened in a dead woman's sewing room while a rescued puppy slept against his chest. He could protect Abby from whatever Miriam had written about waiting. Protect Frank from Owen's disappointment. Protect Grant from losing his position. Protect Sarah from professional shame. Protect Paige from review. Protect himself from the page with his own name at the top. He knew the shape of that lie because he had lived inside it for 2 years. "Pain does not become mercy because we lock it in a drawer," he said. No one answered. He set Boone down gently. The puppy circled once in the small space, sniffed Cedar's old blanket that Frank had carried in, then surprised everyone by walking away from the scents of his first home. He came to Derek, climbed one paw onto his boot, failed, Tried again, and sat with his shoulder pressed against Derek's shin. Present. Choosing. Derek bent and touched the pup's head. The fur between Boone's ears was impossibly soft. "Not a courtroom," Derek said. "Not a performance. These letters go to the people named on them. They decide when to read. The rest of us do not earn the right to witness just because we are curious." Abby nodded, first relief and fear moving together across her face. "Miriam would have liked that." Grant swallowed. "And Owen's envelope?" Derek looked down at the uneven handwriting. "For the last measure, if I lose my nerve." "Not here, not scattered. We gather tomorrow night at St. Agnes. People named in these letters. No board, no donors, no audience." Grant's mouth tightened at the word donors, then loosened when he understood Derek had not invited them. Sarah said, "Paige should be there." "Yes." "She may not come." Derek looked at Boone. "Then she can explain to him why adults are allowed to run." That was unfair, and he knew it. Boone had no place in punishment. Derek corrected himself before anyone else could. "No. She should come because hiding almost killed him, and hiding will not repair what she did." Frank looked at Abby. She was staring at the letter with her name on it. "Will you come?" she asked him. The question was small. It had been waiting years to be asked without armor. Frank's first instinct rose in his face. The old step backward, the old joke, the old promise that morning would do. Derek saw him fight it. "Yes," Frank said, rough as gravel. Abby blinked. "You do not have to say that because everyone is looking." "I am saying it because everyone has looked away long enough." Her mouth trembled. She nodded once,
and turned toward the window before emotion could make a public place of her face. Grant sat in Miriam's sewing chair, suddenly older. "I have her box," he said. Everyone turned. He rubbed his thumb along the seam of his coat.
"The one from her office. Letters, copies, a few things I had no right to keep. I brought some to my car tonight before following you. I thought maybe I would return them quietly if the conversation went badly, which is a coward's way of saying I wanted credit for honesty without risking it." Frank gave a low snort. "Efficient confession." Grant almost smiled. It died quickly. "I will bring the box tomorrow." Abby looked at him for a long time. "Will you bring your resignation too?" The room held its breath. Grant did not look offended. That more than anything told Derek the man had already written it in his mind. "Yes," Grant said. "If the board accepts it." "Not if," Abby replied. "When?" A little of Miriam lived in that tone, and several people in the room seemed to feel it. Sarah crouched to check Boone's bandage again, mostly because her hands needed useful work. "He should sleep soon," she said. "He has had enough human repentance for one day." Boone yawned at the word sleep, as if she had made a medically sound point. Derek lifted him and wrapped him in Cedar's blanket, then tucked Miriam's notebook and the envelopes into a canvas tote Abby found under the desk. He kept Owen's large envelope separate, held against his chest with one hand. Not like a weapon, not like proof, like something fragile that could still cut if handled badly. Before they left, Abby stood in the living room and looked at Cedar's empty corner. "I kept thinking I was preserving Miriam's house by not touching it," she said. "Now it feels like the house was waiting for somebody to make a mess for the right reason." Frank put on his hat. "Miriam always said dust was just memory looking for a place to land." "She did not." "No," Frank said. "But she would have if she had thought of it before me." Abby stared at him, then laughed. A real laugh, cracked and startled, but real. The sound changed the cottage more than the lamp had. Grant opened the front door, and cold rushed in. Snow had covered their footprints on the porch. Derek stepped out with Boone tucked close, Abby locking the door behind them. The little house returned to silence, but not the same silence. This one had been entered. This one knew people were coming back. At the trucks, Sarah touched Derek's sleeve. "Are you all right?" He looked at her. There were many answers. Most of them were useless. "No," he said. Her face softened with respect. "Good answer." He drove home through falling snow, Boone asleep in the crate beside him, the burgundy sash folded under his chin. Derek's phone sat in the cup holder. Once at a red light, it buzzed with a message from Abby. "Tomorrow at 7. Coffee will be bad, Miriam would insist." Derek looked at it until the light changed. Then he typed back, "I'll come." 2 words. Not enough to heal anything. Enough to refuse the old door. Back at the cabin, he carried Boone inside, fed him, checked the stove, and placed Owen's envelope on the kitchen table. The handbell case remained in the hall closet. Derek stood before it for a long time. He did not open it. Not yet. He did, however, put his hand on the brass latch. Boone, from his towel near the stove, thumped his tail once without opening his eyes. "Do not start," Derek said. The tail thumped again. In the quiet that followed, Derek realized the cabin no longer felt orderly. It felt interrupted. There was a puppy bowl by the stove, a towel on the floor, medicine on the counter, a burgundy sash drying over a chair, and a dead friend's handwriting waiting under the kitchen light. The room had been invaded by need. Good.
Maybe need was what had been missing. Derek sat at the table and did not open the envelope. He let it wait in front of him, not as punishment, not as a test, but as a promise that morning would not be used as an excuse again. Outside, snow kept falling over Colorado Springs, covering roads, roofs, tracks,
and old footprints. But beneath it, every path still existed. Tomorrow one of them would lead back to St. Agnes. By early evening, the snow over Colorado Springs had softened into the kind that made traffic slow, voices lower, and chapel windows glow as if light itself had chosen to stay indoors. St. Agnes did not look prepared for a performance. There were no programs, no microphones, no rows of strangers waiting to be moved by other people's pain. In the basement practice room, Abby had set folding chairs in a loose circle around the padded bell tables. A coffee urn hissed on a side table beside paper cups, cinnamon bread from the church kitchen, and a stack of napkins Miriam would have called insufficient. The handbells remained in their covers, except for one low C bell set at the center, its bronze lip marked by a thin crack. Boone lay on a freshly washed burgundy sash beneath Derek's chair, bandaged neat, belly full, eyes half closed, but ears ready for any serious snack development. Derek arrived just before 7 in his olive field jacket, gray sweater, black canvas pants, and boots wiped carefully on the mat. He carried Owen's large envelope and the smaller letters from Miriam in a canvas tote. Abby stood near the whiteboard with her hair pinned back badly and a green cardigan over her dress, rearranging the same stack of folders for the third time. When Derek entered, she looked first at Boone, then the envelope. She did not ask. That was one of the evening's first kindnesses. Sarah came next out of her parka, now wearing a charcoal sweater and dark slacks, her braid damp at the end from snow. She sat near the side wall and kept her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Frank arrived with his hat in both hands, red flannel tucked properly for once, face shaved, boots cleaned but not polished. Abby saw him and froze. He crossed the room without drama and placed one hand briefly on her shoulder. "I should have come sooner," he said. Her eyes filled, and she nodded. He sat beside her, not behind her. Grant entered carrying a wooden box with brass corners. His overcoat hung open, his blue shirt collar slightly crooked, and the careful authority he usually wore seemed to have been left in the car. Paige Donovan came last. She stopped at the doorway when she saw Boone. She looked shorter than Derek remembered, sturdy in a burgundy parka, black waterproof pants, tall snow boots, and gray gloves tucked into one pocket. Cropped auburn hair stuck out from under a knit cap threaded with silver. Her quick brown eyes fixed on the puppy and filled before she could harden them. "He's walking," she said. Derek nodded. "He is." No accusation, no comfort. Just fact. Paige swallowed and came in. Pastor Linda Hart stood quietly near the back wall, not because anyone needed a referee, but because some rooms need a person who knows how to hold silence without trying to own it. She was 59, tall and spare, with short silver hair, warm brown skin, and eyes that listened before her mouth considered speaking. Her black clerical shirt was softened by a knitted blue cardigan, and snow still clung to the hem of her coat over a chair. "I am here only if you need prayer or a door held open," she said. "Sometimes those are the same job." Nobody argued. Grant set Miriam's wooden box on the table and opened it. Inside were envelopes, copies of notes, a ledger of warming room donations, and the original placement page from Miriam's notebook. His voice was steady at first. "I kept these after Miriam died. I told myself I was protecting the people named in them. I told myself the warming room mattered, the grant mattered, St. Agnes mattered. All of that was partly true."
He looked at Boone, who had begun chewing the corner of the clean sash with sleepy determination. That is what made it easy to lie to myself. He drew a folded letter from his pocket. My resignation is in here. The board will receive it tonight.
I have asked to stay on as a volunteer if Abby and the board allow it, but not as director. No gasp came, no applause, just the quiet weight of a man stepping down from the place where he had hidden. Paige stood before Grant sat, perhaps because if she waited, she would lose courage. She did not move to the center of the room. She stayed near the doorway, boots angled toward escape. I mishandled the transfer, she said. Her voice shook, then steadied from work habit more than peace. I used a crate with a latch I knew was old. I counted too fast. When I realized a pup was missing, I called Grant before filing the report because I was afraid the whole network would be suspended. I had other animals placed. I thought if I could find him quietly, everyone would be spared damage. She looked at Boone. He paid for my fear. Boone looked back, chewing, paused because a human had spoken in his direction. Then he sneezed. Paige covered her mouth and cried silently, which made the sneeze both worse and better. I filed the incident report this afternoon, she continued. I will accept the review. I am setting up a separate emergency fund for transport crates, backup foster space, and vet checks. No animal is going to depend on me pretending old equipment is fine because money is tight. Sarah rose next. I knew Miriam wanted a pup to reach Derek if Derek chose him freely. I knew the count was wrong. I asked one question and let the answer soothe me because I wanted to believe the bridge Miriam hoped for was still intact. She looked at Derek. I was wrong. Waiting was a choice. The sentence moved through Derek like cold water over an old scar. Waiting was a choice. He knew. Frank did not stand. He sat forward with elbows on knees, hat turning in his hands. Owen called me that night, asked me to come. I said roads were bad and morning would do. I have spent 2 years making that sentence sound practical. He looked at Abby. It was fear. Abby reached for his hand. He let her take it. That small permission seemed to cost him more than any speech. Derek opened Miriam's envelopes one by one and handed them to the names written on them. He did not read them aloud. Pain did not need an audience to become real. Confession did not need spectators to become brave. Abby took hers with both hands. Sarah tucked hers against her chest. Grant held his as if it might burn him. Paige received hers and whispered thank you to Miriam, not to Derek. Frank stared at his envelope for a long time before sliding it into his vest pocket. Derek kept the last one his own, beside Owen's larger packet. Pastor Linda spoke then from the wall. Forgiveness is not a shortcut around responsibility, she said gently. It is a road responsibility can walk without pretending harm was small. The room did not answer because the sentence did not ask for one. Abby poured coffee nobody wanted. Frank took a cup anyway and made a face after one sip.
Miriam would approve.
Abby wiped her cheek. Of the coffee. Of its threat level. A little laughter moved around the room, cautious but alive.
Boone woke at the sound, crawled out from under Derek's chair, and walked directly to Paige. The room held still. Paige froze, hands open at her sides. Boone sniffed her boot, considered the matter, then sat on it with a tired sigh. Paige's face crumpled. She did not touch him. She just stood there and let the small weight rest where it had chosen. Derek watched and felt the old desire to control the meaning rise, then pass. Boone was not absolving anyone. He was tired and warm and had found a boot. That was enough. Grant opened Miriam's box fully and placed the original torn page on the table. "This belongs in the file," he said. Abby nodded. "It will go there." Derek looked at Owen's envelope. His name was on one page inside. He had seen that much. The old version of him wanted to take it home, close the cabin door,
and read it alone, when no face could witness what it did to him. The newer part, the one Boone had dragged out of a culvert with a sash and a whine, understood that alone had been his favorite hiding place. He broke the seal. The paper inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and time. At the top, in Owen's uneven hand, was Derek's name. Derek, I called, because love had finally run out of excuses. Derek's vision blurred before the second line. Boone, still on Page's boot, lifted his head as if checking whether Derek was still there. Derek was. For once, he kept reading. The practice room at St. Agnes grew so quiet that the storm outside seemed to step closer to the windows and listen. Derek held Owen's letter in both hands, the paper trembling slightly, though no one in the room would have been foolish enough to mention it. Boone left Page's boot and padded back toward him slow on the bandaged paw, then lowered himself onto the clean burgundy sash beneath Derek's chair. The puppy's eyes stayed half open, sleepy, but watchful. Derek looked at the page again. Derek, I called because love had finally run out of excuses. I spent years pretending I knew what would save you, and maybe part of me did know something true. You were not eating. You were not sleeping. You looked at rooms like you were measuring where the exits were, and whether anyone would notice if you used them. I was scared. That is the honest part. The arrogant part is that I turned fear into a decision and called it loyalty. Derek stopped, breath caught in a place too deep for sound. He remembered the service dog denial, the clean paper, the polite language, the shame of folding the letter and hiding it, as if even the trash might judge him. He remembered Owen showing up with groceries afterward, pretending he had simply bought too much soup. He remembered anger arriving months later when part of the truth leaked through. Remembered telling Owen that friendship with the steering wheel was still control. He had not known then how much of the wound was real and how much had been love breaking the wrong window. He continued, I did not call that night so you could save my body. If I wanted saving, I should have listened to Miriam and Frank and gone to the hospital when my chest started acting like a bad drummer. I called because I owed you the choice I took. I wanted to say I was sorry for deciding that a dog would become your whole reason to live, when what I should have done was trust you enough to stand nearby while you chose your own reasons. If you did not answer, and knowing you might not, because both of us could make pride look like weather. I hope someday you stop making one missed call carry the weight of your whole life. Do not answer the phone to save me, brother. Answer it someday to save whatever part of you still wants to come home. Derek lowered the letter. The room swam, then steadied. No one moved toward him. That was mercy. Below the letter, Owen had written the last measure of the bell that carries home. Simple notes for the low C bell and the middle bells that would answer it. Not grand, not complicated, almost plain. Maybe that was why it hurt. Derek looked at the cracked low C on the table. Owen had always played it. The bronze surface held the light in a dull glow, the handle worn where fingers had gripped through years of hesitant music. Frank stood. The chair legs scraped softly. I have the first note, Derek said, though he did not know he was going to say it until the words were out. Frank looked at him. You don't have to. I know. Derek reached for the bell. His hand stopped an inch from the handle. His fingers would not close. His body had obeyed him through cold water, gunfire, broken ribs, sleep deprivation, and all the small brutalities men call training. Now it refused a piece of bronze in a church basement. Boone lifted his head. His tail tapped once against the sash. Not encouragement, not symbolism, just a soft thump from a small creature who had no idea what courage looked like, unless it smelled like breakfast. Frank crossed the room and picked up another low bell from the table, not the cracked one, a companion note Miriam had marked in pencil. Then let me be late but useful. Abby looked at her father with something like wonder. Frank's hand shook when he lifted the bell. He did not hide it. "Measure 42?" Abby asked, voice barely steady. "Miriam would haunt us if we started in the wrong place," Frank said. That earned a small laugh, and the laugh gave them enough air to begin. Abby took a middle bell. Sarah took another, though she admitted under her breath that she had terrible rhythm and no legal training for bronze objects. Paige shook her head at first, then accepted a small treble bell from Abby with the expression of a woman being handed a live wire. Grant stood behind a table, reading the notation as if a grant audit might appear between the measures. Pastor Linda did not take a bell. She stood by the wall, smiling gently, holding space with both hands folded. Frank rang the first note. It came out rough, a little late, the sound dark and warm enough to make the room's wooden floor seem to answer. Abby entered too soon, winced, kept going. Sarah missed her first cue and whispered sorry to Miriam, who was not there to enjoy it. Paige rang too softly, then too hard, and Boone startled at the bright note, ears flying in opposite directions. Derek almost laughed through the tightness in his throat. Grant came in exactly on time, which annoyed everyone and helped the music. The measure wobbled. It breathed. It did not fall apart. Derek touched the cracked low C. The handle was cool, familiar in a way he had tried to forget. His hand closed. For a moment he was back 2 years earlier, standing beside Owen, both of them pretending the bells were not teaching them to wait for one another. Owen saying, "You cannot muscle timing Langford. You have to trust the empty space." Derek had told him the empty space was poorly managed. Owen had grinned. Now the empty space waited again. Frank's note rang. Abby answered. Sarah found hers. The cracked low C came due. Derek lifted the bell and rang. The sound was imperfect, a warm note with a faint roughness where the crack lived, but it filled the room all the same. It traveled through the handle, into his palm, up the bones of his arm, into the locked place under his ribs where Owen's call had been ringing unanswered for 2 years. Derek rang the next note. Not beautifully, honestly. Boone sat up beneath the chair, eyes wide, head tilted toward the bell. His folded ear rose halfway, failed, and flopped again. Paige made a sound that was definitely crying and tried to disguise it as a cough. The music continued. No one was healed all at once. Grant still had to face the board. Paige still had to face review. Sarah still had trust to rebuild. Frank still had Abby's long silence to answer for, and his own to confess beyond one evening. Abby still had Miriam's empty office waiting upstairs. Derek still had a phone call he could never return. But for the length of that last measure, no one hid behind protection. No one called delay wisdom. No one left the door unopened because morning might be easier. When the final note faded, the room did not applaud. It breathed. Boone crawled from beneath the chair and came to Derek's boot. He leaned there, warm and small and living.
Derek bent and lifted him without hesitation.
The puppy licked his chin once, quick and clumsy. Derek laughed. It startled everyone, including him. The sound was brief, rough from disuse, but it belonged in the room. Abby wiped her face. Frank looked at the ceiling as if Miriam might be smirking from a better vantage point. Grant sat down, hard letter in his hands. Paige knelt near the sash and cried openly now, no longer pretending a cough could carry that much water. Pastor Linda spoke softly. Some bells crack and still ring. No one answered. They did not need to. Later, when people began gathering coats and folding chairs without being asked, Sarah handed Derek a form from her bag. He stared at it. What is this? Temporary to permanent adoption paperwork, she said. No pressure. Boone's medical hold can become a foster hold with you until review clears, if you want. Derek looked down at Boone, who had fallen asleep in his arms with his mouth slightly open, all solemn dignity abandoned. The urge to sign came fast, almost too fast. Miriam's warning rose with it. Choose the dog, not the debt. Derek folded the paper once and tucked it into his jacket. Not tonight. Sarah nodded as if that answer pleased her. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky over Colorado Springs had begun to clear, leaving the streetlights shining on wet pavement and piled white along the curb. Derek carried Boone to the truck while the others lingered in the chapel doorway, not quite ready to return to separate houses. At the driver's door, he looked toward the dark outline of Garden of the Gods beyond town, where red stone waited under snow, and morning would find it whether anyone deserved morning or not. He put Boone's crate on the passenger seat, started the truck, and drove that way before he had fully explained to himself why. Dawn rose over Garden of the Gods, slowly pink at the edges first, then gold spilling across the red sandstone fins until the whole park looked as if it had been lit from within. Snow lay in thin white seams along the trails and gathered in the shadows of the rocks, while Pikes Peak stood bright and distant under a sky washed clean by the night storm. Derek parked before the first hikers arrived and carried Boone to a flat stone bench near the path. The air smelled of juniper, coal dust, and pine. Boone wriggled before Derek set him down, impatient with all human ceremony. Once on the ground, he bounded 3 uneven steps, remembered his bandaged paw, slowed to a dignified trot, then attacked a harmless clump of snow with the ferocity of an animal determined to make up for nearly dying by embarrassing winter personally. Derek watched him roll, sneeze, and look offended by the snow he had put in his own nose. Strategic error, Derek said. Boone barked once, high and ridiculous, then came back to check whether Derek was still there. He was. Derek took the folded adoption papers from his jacket, along with Miriam's copied line from the notebook, Derek Langford. Only if he chooses the dog, not the debt. He read it as the sun touched the paper. For 2 years, he had made a shrine of one unanswered call. It had not looked like a shrine. It looked like a clean cabin, a turned-down invitation, a handbell case left closed, a phone allowed to ring. A life kept orderly enough that nothing tender could trip over the furniture. Then Boone had arrived, half frozen, wrapped in burgundy wool, carrying a message people had mistaken for destiny, when the truest thing about him was simpler. He wanted warmth. He wanted food. He wanted the man who had lifted him from snow to keep showing up. Derek signed the adoption form on the stone bench with a pen that skipped once in the cold. His hand shook. He let it. Boone ran back at that moment with a twig in his mouth, dropped it on Derek's boot, and stared as if presenting legal evidence. Derek looked at the twig, then the papers. This your contribution? Boone sneezed. Accepted. Derek laughed softly and folded the signed form into his jacket. He did not feel forgiven in some grand, complete way. He did not feel repaired. He felt present. That was new enough. By mid-morning, St. Agnes had its basement doors open for the warming room. No speeches announced it. Abby had handwritten a sign and taped it near the entrance. Coffee blankets, soup, rides if needed. Come in from the cold. Grant stood behind the coffee table in a volunteer apron that did nothing for his dignity and possibly improved his soul. He poured too much coffee into a paper cup, apologized to a man named Walt, and accepted correction from Abby without attempting to manage the entire room. Paige arrived with 2 new transport crates, bright orange safety tags, spare latches, and a clipboard listing emergency foster backups. She knelt when she saw Boone, but did not reach for him until he came to her. He sniffed her glove, considered it, then stole the loose end of her scarf. Paige cried again, which seemed likely to become a habit around him. Sarah checked Boone's paw near the supply table and declared it healing well, then stayed to give free, quick exams to 2 foster dogs Paige had brought in for vaccinations. Frank came carrying a toolbox and a paper bag of cinnamon rolls. Abby met him at the door. For a moment they stood awkwardly, father and daughter, with too many lost mornings between them. Then Frank held out the bag. Peace offering. Abby peered inside. These are from Miller's Bakery. I am not arrogant enough to bake peace. She smiled, and this time she did not look away. Derek brought Boone through the room on a blue leash he had bought after trying 3 collars at the feed store. He had chosen blue because Boone chewed it first, and Derek had decided that was the closest thing to a preference the legal system needed. Veterans drifted in through the morning, some for coffee, some for blankets, some to pretend they were only checking on Grant's ability to pour coffee without ruining county infrastructure. Boone became immediately useful by lying under the table where nervous men could pretend they were bending down to tie boots while actually stroking his soft sable fur. Derek noticed. He did not comment. He understood dignity's strange roots. In the afternoon, the Valor Bells practiced for the first time without calling it a memorial, a revival, or a healing service. They simply gathered in the room and uncovered the bells. Abby took Miriam's old place at the front, but refused to use Miriam's pencil, saying some relics were better left sacred and unsharpened. Frank stood beside her with a bass bell. Sarah sat between 2 older veterans and admitted again that rhythm had not improved overnight. Grant came in late from the coffee table and took his place without apology, because apology had already become work. Paige stayed near the doorway with the small treble bell ready to leave if needed, but not leaving. Pastor Linda watched from the side, knitting something blue that might become a scarf or possibly a sermon with sleeves. Derek opened the handbell case he had brought from his cabin. The low C rested inside, polished that morning for the first time in 2 years. He picked it up. Boone lay on the clean burgundy sash beneath the table head on his paws, eyes moving from bell to bell. The first run-through of the bell that carries home was terrible. Sarah entered early. Frank entered late. Grant, annoyingly, entered exactly right. Abby stopped them twice, and once said, "Miriam would have thrown a cough drop at you," which was probably true. Boone thumped his tail on the floor at random intervals, creating a separate rhythm that no one requested, but everyone eventually accepted. Derek rang the low notes. The sound moved through him not as punishment now, not as a demand from the dead, but as work shared by the living. At one point, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He froze. The old instinct rose sharp and familiar. Ignore it. Let it pass. Morning will do.
Boone lifted his head under the table and looked at him. Derek set the bell down, took out the phone, and answered. It was Walt from the warming room asking where the extra snow shovels were. Derek closed his eyes, then smiled. Closet by the rear stairs, he said. And do not use the blue one. It bends if you look at it with ambition. Walt grumbled thanks and hung up. Derek put the phone away. The room had noticed, but no one made it a spectacle. Abby simply raised her bell. From the top. Derek nodded. From the top. Evening found him outside St. Agnes with Boone sitting on his boot,
watching snow begin again under the chapel light. The puppy had a home now. Not a perfect one. A real one. There would be vet visits, chewed socks, bad nights, phone calls Derek still did not want to answer, meetings where Grant learned humility by committee, reviews where Paige told the truth even when it cost her, and Sundays when Frank and Abby stood too close to old hurt and chose not to step away. Owen was still gone. Miriam's chair was still empty. Derek's missed call remained a fact. But facts were not always chains. Some were stones in a path. Boone leaned harder against his leg. Derek bent and lifted him, feeling the warm weight settle against his chest. The chapel bells above them did not ring. They did not need to. Inside, human hands were learning to do that again. Sometimes healing does not begin when the past finally makes sense. Sometimes it begins when God places a living need in front of us and asks us to answer today, not yesterday, not tomorrow, today. Derek could not return Owen's last call. He could not undo the fear, the silence, or the delay that left Boone in the snow. But he could open the door now. He could feed the puppy in his arms, tell the truth to the people beside him, and let love become action instead of regret. Maybe that is a lesson for all of us. We cannot repair every missed moment, but we can stop letting one painful moment decide the rest of our lives. We can choose tenderness. We can answer the next call. We can carry love forward with the strength we still have. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen and tell us who you are praying for tonight. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty and second chances. And may God bring gentle peace to every place in you, still learning how to heal.